Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rula Deeb. I'm a senior principal at Geosynta Consultants in Oakland, California. I'm the coordinator of the webinar series on behalf of SERDP and ESTCP. This webinar is the first in a two-part series on managing AFFF impacts to subsurface environments and assessing commercially available PFAS-free foams. The second part of the series will take place in 2 weeks. Today, we will start with a brief overview of SERDP and ESTCP, followed by 2 technical presentations. First, Dr. Damien Helbling from Cornell University will present his work on developing and optimizing cyclodextrin-based adsorbents to remove PFAS from groundwater. We will have a short Q&A following Damien's presentation, and then Dr. Satya Chahwan from Battelle will summarize his research on optimizing compressed air foam and ultra-high pressure foam delivery systems to improve the quality of commercial off-the-shelf PFAS-free foams. Satya's presentation will also be followed by a Q&A session, and we will conclude the webinar with a longer Q&A session featuring both of today's speakers. The next few slides provide instructions on optimizing your webinar experience. If you have not done so already, please download Zoom at the link shown here and also provide it to you in your webinar registration confirmation email. If you are unable to download Zoom, you may view the slides using a compatible internet browser such as Firefox, IE, or Edge, and by creating a free Zoom account. If you're unable to see the slides in Zoom, or if your screen freezes, try keying Control and F5, and that will allow you to perform a hard refresh of the screen. If you plan to access the audio through your computer, click the arrow next to the Join Audio button, select Test Speaker and Microphone, and follow the prompts as they appear on your screen. If you continue to experience difficulties, please call into the conference line shown here. You may also submit a comment using the chat box, but please only use the chat box for comments related to technical difficulties because the Q&A option should be reserved for questions for the speakers. In case of continued difficulties, just download a PDF of the slides from the webinar webpage and call into the conference line. Keep in mind that we will be live streaming the webinar on the SERDP and ESTCP YouTube channel at the link shown here, so that's another option to follow the slides. Finally, one last reminder, today's broadcast will be listen only. You may submit questions by using the Q&A box on your screen. You do not need to wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. And when you do submit them, please add your organization name at the end of your question so that we can identify it during these Q&A sessions. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Robin Nisan, who is the SERDP and ESTCP Program Manager for the Weapons Systems and Platforms Program area. And before joining SERDP and ESTCP, Robin worked at Navarre's Weapons Division, China Lake in California. Robin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Rula. Pleased to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Okay. SERDP is the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program. It was established in 1991 by Congress as a partnership between the DoD, the Department of Energy, and EPA. SERDP's mission is to identify and address high-priority environmental science and technology opportunities that focus on DoD requirements. SERDP funds both fundamental research as well as advanced technology development, which will ultimately impact real-world environmental management. ESTCP is the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. In this program, we demonstrate innovative environmental and energy technologies. The investments here capitalize on past investments under SERDP or other research programs and are designed to transition technology out of the lab and into the field. Especially important in all ESTCP demonstrations is the ultimate transition to implementation and regulatory acceptance. SERDP and ESTCP are complementary programs, with much of SERDP research occurring at the lab and pilot scale, with occasional field efforts, while ESTCP demonstrations are primarily carried out at the pilot and field scale. Occasionally, supporting lab efforts are conducted in ESTCP. There are four program areas in SERDP and 5 in ESTCP. Insulation, energy, and water program is ESTCP only, while the other 4, environmental restoration, munitions response, resource conservation and resiliency, and weapon systems and platforms, are SERDP and ESTCP programs, managed jointly by a designated program manager. Today's webinar represents results from research and demonstration efforts that were conducted under 2 program areas, both environmental restoration and weapon systems and platforms. Environmental restoration program has 5 main areas of research: contaminated groundwater, contaminants on DoD and testing ranges, contaminated sediments, wastewater treatment, and risk assessment. While the weapon systems and platforms program area has 5 major focus areas, and they include surface engineering and structural materials, energetic materials and munitions, noise and emissions, waste reduction and treatment, in DoD operations, and lead-free electronics. In addition, I'd like to go through this slide. We fund a broad range of PFAS-related projects, and an overview of everything we're doing in PFAS research can be accessed through the link you find on the bottom of this slide. The boxes along the top of the graph illustrate workshops that have been held to develop a strategic plan for addressing PFAS issues. Reports are prepared for each workshop, and summarizations of those reports can be found by clicking on the boxes on top. SERDP statements of need are specific topics released as part of our annual solicitation, and they describe research areas of interest for that fiscal year. Click on one of those statements of need and you will be taken to summaries of all of the projects that were selected as a part of those need statements and any reports that were published with those projects. Each ESTCP topic listed represents a single topic, and you can click on one of those boxes on the bottom portion of the screen and go to their project webpage. So very useful to get all of what we're doing in PFAS by using this site. Our webinar series highlights research and demonstration efforts from each of the 5 program areas, and upcoming webinars will cover compound-specific isotope analysis for groundwater, long-term ecological studies and risk assessment approaches at PFAS-impacted sites, and others, as you can see here. You can find additional information about upcoming webinars using this link, and I'd like to remind you that a copy of today's presentation can be downloaded from our webinar webpage. We'd appreciate it if you could take a moment at the end of this webinar to complete a survey that will pop up on your screen. And finally, I'd like to remind you that registration is open for the 2020 SERDP and ESTCP Symposium. This 5-day virtual event showcases the latest technologies that enhance DoD's mission through improved environmental and energy performance. Hope you will enjoy today's webinar, and it's back to you, Rula.
Thank you so much, Robin. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Damien Helbling, who's an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering at Cornell University in New York. Damien's research focuses on the occurrence and fate of organic chemicals in both natural and engineered water systems. He has authored more than 50 peer-reviewed research papers And as far as his academic background, he earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Penn State and master's and doctoral degrees in civil and environmental engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. Damien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rula, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm going to be speaking to you about my SERDP project, which aims to discover new types of polymeric adsorbents that are effective at removing per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or so-called PFAS, from contaminated groundwater. My co-PI on this project is Will Dittell, who is a professor of chemistry at Northwestern University, and we are also partnered with CycloPure, a startup company that is commercializing the cyclodextrin-based adsorbents that we have developed during the course of this project. So this is my agenda that will take us through the next 23 minutes or so. I will start by introducing some of the conventional adsorbents that are currently used for PFAS remediation and emphasize the need for alternative adsorbents. I will then introduce cyclodextrins and cyclodextrin polymers as new materials that we hope will contribute to PFAS remediation solutions. I will then tell you how we have directed the development of cyclodextrin polymers to impart affinity for different types of PFAS, and how we are now, in collaboration with CycloPure, pushing the development of cyclodextrin polymers towards implementation in remediation systems. I will end with a summary and some conclusions, along with some statements on how our project explicitly benefits the Department of Defense. So granular activated carbon and ion exchange resins are conventional adsorbents used for water remediation, and both have been used for the remediation of PFAS-contaminated groundwater. These are relatively mature technologies, and we know a lot about the features that make them effective and some of the deficiencies that limit their broad application and motivate the search for alternative adsorbents. Let's consider granular activated carbon first. So granular activated carbon is a widely accessible and inexpensive material, has hydrophobic surfaces that have affinity for hydrophobic adsorbates, and has a microporous structure that imparts high surface area and high adsorption capacity. However, granular activated carbon exhibits relatively slow, diffusion-limited kinetics. Its surfaces can be fouled by natural organic matter, and regeneration of spent granular activated carbon is energy intensive and relatively expensive. With respect to PFAS, granular activated carbon can adequately remove long-chain perfluoroalkyl acids from water, but has lower affinity for short-chain perfluoroalkyl acids. On the other hand, ion exchange resins can be more selective for target adsorbates. They can exhibit more rapid adsorption kinetics, and some emerging ion exchange resins are regenerable. However, ion exchange resins are relatively expensive materials, can be fouled by inorganic ions in groundwater, and are limited to ionized adsorbates of the appropriate charge. For example, with respect to PFAS, some anion exchange resins have proven effective at removing some types of anionic perfluoroalkyl acids from contaminated groundwater to varying degrees. So conventional adsorbents can get the job done, but some notable deficiencies motivate ongoing investigations into alternative adsorbents that can perform better. And an ideal adsorbent, in my view, would exhibit rapid adsorption kinetics, high adsorption capacity, limit fouling or adsorption inhibition from water matrix constituents, and be readily regenerable to minimize the costs over the life cycle of an adsorption process. So now I want to introduce you to cyclodextrins. Cyclodextrins are macrocycles of glucose that are sustainably produced from cornstarch by means of enzymatic conversion. Beta-cyclodextrin is a macrocycle of 7 glucose molecules, which results in a sort of cup-like shaped structure with a hollow interior cavity that has a diameter of about 0.78 nanometers. And whereas the hydroxyl groups along the perimeter of the cyclodextrins make them hydrophilic and soluble in water, the interior cavity is hydrophobic and is known to form host-guest complexes driven by hydrophobic interactions with thousands of organic molecules. These simultaneous hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties make cyclodextrins quite useful for a variety of industrial and commercial applications, including drug delivery and as a key ingredient in household odor eliminators. A number of studies over the years have used a technique called nuclear magnetic resonance to study the ways in which organic molecules bind in the interior cavity of cyclodextrins. And one such study demonstrated that beta-cyclodextrin is an outstanding complexing agent for perfluoroalkyl acids, and the data suggests that one PFAS molecule can be threaded into the interior cavity of beta-cyclodextrin and sequestered, as shown in the schematic in the bottom right of this slide. We found this result to be particularly exciting, and it motivated our team to start investigating the potential for polymers of cyclodextrin to be used as adsorbents for PFAS remediation. So polymers of cyclodextrins have also been manufactured for decades, but the utility of previous non-porous cyclodextrin polymers as adsorbents for water treatment has been limited because they do not outperform activated carbon in terms of adsorption kinetics or adsorption capacity. So our goal was to synthesize a cyclodextrin polymer that was permanently porous and had a high surface area to maximize its potential as an adsorbent for water purification. Fortunately, Will Dichtel, my co-PI from Northwestern, is a polymer chemist who specializes in the synthesis of porous polymer networks. His team came up with an approach to polymerize beta-cyclodextrin with a rigid aromatic crosslinker that resulted in the first cyclodextrin polymer with permanent mesoporosity and high surface area, which we refer to as P-CDP, or a porous cyclodextrin polymer. The synthesis reaction is shown schematically on the left of this slide. The resulting polymer network is shown as a cartoon here in the center, and in its as synthesized morphology in the images on the right. The as synthesized material is a yellowish powder with an average particle size on the order of tens of microns in diameter. The permanent mesoporosity and high surface area of the material allows for rapid transport of adsorbates to the interior of the polymer particle, where they can then access the interior cavities of the cyclodextrin monomers, which serve as the primary binding sites. So we have evaluated this P-CDP as an adsorbent for water purification in a variety of ways, and we have learned how the structure and morphology of P-CDP results in excellent adsorption performance relative to conventional adsorbents. The data on this slide show the removal of 90 contaminants of concern on P-CDP and activated carbon in the presence of natural organic matter. Data on that dashed one-to-one line, that diagonal line, represent contaminants that are removed equally by both P-CDP and activated carbon. And data above the one-to-one line show improved removal on P-CDP, and data below the one-to-one line show improved removal on activated carbon. The data points represent the 90 contaminants and are colored to represent the charge state of each contaminant. And generally, what we can see from this plot is that P-CDP outperforms activated carbon for the majority of the contaminants studied here. And there are several more specific points that I want to make here about P-CDP. First, P-CDP exhibits rapid adsorption kinetics. In these and many other experiments, we have observed that adsorption equilibrium is often attained within minutes, whereas conventional adsorbents often require hours or even days to reach equilibrium. Second, adsorption of target contaminants on P-CDP is not inhibited by natural organic matter. This is primarily because large natural organic matter molecules cannot access the interior cavity of the cyclodextrins. Third, there is some selectivity to adsorption on P-CDP, with some adsorbates exhibiting high affinity and others exhibiting low affinity, as we can see in this plot. And fourth, some of that selectivity is related to the charge of the adsorbate, with enhanced affinity for cationic adsorbates, evidenced by the cluster of red data points in the top part of this figure. Enhanced affinity for cations was quite unexpected, considering the primary binding mechanism is expected to be host-guest complex formation driven by hydrophobic interactions. More on this affinity for cations in a couple of slides. And finally, with all of these points made, we also found that P-CDP could not effectively remove perfluoroalkyl acids from water. This was also unexpected, considering what we know that beta-cyclodextrin itself is an outstanding complexing agent for PFAS. So to recap here, P-CDP is an outstanding adsorbent that outperforms conventional adsorbents for the removal of many types of contaminants from water, but has relatively poor affinity for perfluoroalkyl acids. But we also know from those nuclear magnetic resonance studies that beta-cyclodextrin itself is an outstanding complexing agent for perfluoroalkyl acids. So we were motivated to direct the evolution of cyclodextrin polymers to improve their affinity for PFAS. And we decided to focus our attention here on the Crosslinker. And over the course of a year or more, we synthesized dozens upon dozens of different types of cyclodextrin polymers with different crosslinkers. And some of those polymers exhibited improved affinity for PFAS, which was encouraging, but none actually demonstrated the rapid adsorption kinetics and high adsorption capacity that P-CDP exhibits for many other types of adsorbents. Eventually, we made a really important discovery with respect to P-CDP. Whereas we thought our synthesis led to a structure, as shown on the left of this slide, with the crosslinker reacting only with the beta-cyclodextrins, resulting in a solid material with no surface charge, we eventually realized that side reactions were occurring during the synthesis that resulted in the formation of phenolic groups on the crosslinker that were deprotonated at neutral pH. The resulting phenolate groups gave P-CDP an unexpected negative surface charge, which we hypothesized could lead to the enhanced affinity for cationic adsorbates and the limited affinity for the anionic perfluoroalkyl acids. So to test this hypothesis, we developed a post-synthetic reduction procedure to reduce the residual nitrile groups on P-CDP to amine groups. The resulting amine groups would be protonated at circumneutral pH, giving rise to a positive surface charge on this new derivative, which we refer to as amine CDP. And I should point out that zeta potential measurements confirm a negative surface charge on P-CDP and a positive surface charge on amine CDP. So the result of this conversion of P-CDP to amine CDP was dramatic. The data shown in this plot represent the distribution coefficients measured for over 100 contaminants of concern on both P-CDP and amine CDP. The conditions of the batch experiments are shown sort of in the top right corner of this plot. And 90 of the data points represent the same 90 contaminants I showed on a previous slide, and the yellow data points represent a set of perfluoroalkyl acids. The take-home message that I want to make here is that surface charge determines the affinity of each cyclodextrin polymer for adsorbates of different charge states. The red data points demonstrate that P-CDP has a greater affinity for cationic adsorbates, as we had already shown. But now we see from the blue data points that amine CDP has a greater affinity for anionic adsorbates. And finally, and I'm saying finally here because we were chasing this result for quite some time, we see the enhanced affinity of amine CDP for anionic perfluoroalkyl acids. We see actually a 3 order of magnitude improvement on the affinity of anionic perfluoroalkyl acids for amine CDP over P-CDP. We still expect that the interior cavity of the cyclodextrins are the primary binding sites for adsorption, but the charges on the crosslinker must somehow facilitate transport of adsorbates with complementary charge to the adsorption sites or otherwise facilitate the adsorption mechanism. The data shown here offer a more conventional view of the adsorption of 22 anionic PFAS on amine CDP. These data were again derived from batch experiments, 10 milligrams per liter of the adsorbent, which was amine CDP, and 500 nanograms per liter of each adsorbate. And the adsorbates included 9 perfluorocarboxylic acids, 7 perfluorosulfonic acids, GenX, 3 fluorotelomere sulfonic acids, and 2 nitrogen substituted sulfonamide acetic acids. And the blue bars show that the average removal of each PFAS after 30 minutes of contact time with amine CDP, which results in between 60 and 95% removal for all 22 PFAS. The data also show that equilibrium was attained sometime between 30 minutes and 4 hours and equilibrium removal was greater than 90% for all 22 PFAS that we studied here. Notably, this includes PFBA and PFBS, which are short-chain perfluoroalkyl acids that are difficult to remove with conventional adsorbents. So we were really excited about amine CDP, and we began to be curious about the potential for different cyclodextrin polymers with different cross-linker chemistry to remove other types of PFAS from contaminated groundwater. Although the anionic perfluoroalkyl acids get a lot of attention, we know that there are a variety of cationic, zwitterionic, non-ionic PFAS in contaminated groundwater. And in this study, we took 3 cyclodextrin polymers, P-CDP and amine CDP, along with a new derivative that incorporates a positive surface charge in a new way that we call CDP+. And we benchmarked their performance against an anion exchange resin and a cation exchange resin under identical experimental conditions. And we measured distribution coefficients for 11 PFAS on each of the adsorbents using these experimental conditions. And we included 4 anionic PFAS, shown here in the bottom left, and we included 4 non-ionic PFAS, including 2 perfluorosulfonamides and 2 fluorotelomere alcohols, and 3 zwitterionic PFAS. What we found was that CDPs had higher affinity for these 11 PFAS than the ion exchange resins, though different CDPs with different cross-linkers had affinity for different classes of PFAS. For example, amine CDP and CDP+ has higher distribution coefficients for the anionic PFAS and the 2 perfluorosulfonamides when compared to the anion exchange resin, and P-CDP outperformed the cation exchange resin and the anion exchange resin for the zwitterionic PFAS, as evidenced by the highest distribution coefficients for P-CDP shown here. So this is also a very exciting result for us because we now see and understand how different combinations of cyclodextrin polymers with different cross-linkers can be used together for the remediation of groundwater impacted by diverse groups of PFAS. We've also done some experiments with groundwater, including spiked groundwater and PFAS-contaminated groundwater. The data in this slide show results from experiments with 1 spiked groundwater sample and 3 native groundwater samples of contaminated groundwater. And we evaluated the removal of PFAS with amine CDP, CDP+, and activated carbon in each groundwater sample and compared the results to the removal of the same PFAS in a clean water matrix. This allowed us to estimate the extent of adsorption inhibition experienced by each adsorbent in each groundwater sample. We also measured the concentrations of various matrix constituents in each groundwater sample so that we could relate any observed adsorption inhibition to specific matrix constituents. What we found was that the extent of adsorption inhibition experienced by amine CDP and CDP+ varied among the groundwater samples, and that CDP+ always exhibited less adsorption inhibition, and sometimes no adsorption inhibition at all, as shown in panel D. When we analyzed these data alongside the concentrations of matrix constituents, we found that adsorption inhibition was most directly linked to pH and the concentration of divalent cations in the groundwater, with higher pH values and higher concentrations of divalent cations leading to more adsorption inhibition. So the data from these experiments are useful because they help determine when cyclodextrin polymers could be used directly for site remediation or when they could be implemented as part of a treatment train that includes some pretreatment for example, divalent cations. Okay, I want to wrap up the technical part of this talk by discussing our efforts to push the development of cyclodextrin polymers towards implementation in remediation systems. As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, CycloPure is a startup company that is commercializing the cyclodextrin-based adsorbents that we have developed. P-CDP is being marketed as Dexorb, and CDP+ is being marketed as Dexorb+. And CycloPure has made really tremendous progress in translating our bench scale synthesis procedures into a process that can produce sufficient quantities of Dexorb and Dexorb+ for industrial or commercial applications. Here I want to talk about our efforts to transform the as-synthesized powdered adsorbents into granular materials that are suitable for packed bed filtration processes. As part of this SERDP project, CycloPure has explored a variety of so-called granularization procedures. The approach that has shown the most promise is a spray granularization technique that combines the as-synthesized adsorbent powder with an FDA-approved binder material in a high-shear granulator. The resulting particle size can be controlled by the rate of binder addition and the amount of shear force provided by the impellers, and it's actually pretty easy to control particle morphology in this way. And the images in the middle here show adsorbent particles of different sizes, and on the right you can see a batch of produced materials and an image of the resulting particles. Importantly, the performance of the resulting granules does not change significantly following granularization. The data provided here show the removal of 4 perfluoroalkyl acids using the as-synthesized CDP+, and the granular form of CDP+, also known as Dexorb+. The as-synthesized material has an average particle size on the order of tens of microns, and the granular material has an average particle diameter of 500 microns. And although there is some expected decrease in adsorption kinetics with the granular material, as surface area will decrease with increasing particle size, the decrease in adsorption kinetics is less than one would expect when comparing powdered activated carbon and granular activated carbon. The adsorption capacity is also not influenced at all by the granularization, as we've demonstrated in other experiments. So these data demonstrate that the particle size and the morphology of CDPs can be controlled to match particle sizes in existing packed bed filtration systems that employ conventional adsorbents, which makes the transition to pilot testing in packed columns relatively simple. And finally, I would like to mention something about the regeneration potential of cyclodextrin polymers. In 2 of our earlier studies, we have demonstrated facile regeneration and reuse of cyclodextrin polymers following a rinse with diluted methanol. The regenerated cyclodextrin polymers could then be used again at least 4 more times without any loss in performance. These early proof of concept studies demonstrate that host-guest complexes can be disrupted by an organic solvent, and we are currently working to refine our regeneration protocol to optimize the solvent type, the need for any amendments to the solvent, and the volume required to regenerate a certain bed volume of cyclodextrin polymers. We hope that these efforts will lead to a regeneration procedure that will allow the life cycle costs of cyclodextrin polymer-based remediation processes to be competitive with those of conventional adsorbents, if not less expensive. So to conclude, our project has resulted in a family of novel adsorbents that target PFAS. Although cyclodextrins are ideal complexing agents for many types of PFAS, we learned that it is essential to consider the chemistry of the crosslinker to enhance the affinity of cyclodextrin polymers for different classes of PFAS. Cyclodextrin polymers are inherently resistant to adsorption inhibition from natural organic matter, but may be inhibited in systems that operate at relatively high pH or in the presence of divalent cations. CycloPure has developed scale-up pathways and a technique to granularize our as-synthesized powders to control particle size and morphology, which will enable more efficient translation of cyclodextrin polymers into existing adsorption processes. And we have demonstrated facile regeneration and reuse potential that we continue to explore and optimize. This project offers a number of benefits to the Department of Defense. Primarily, we hope to provide RPMs with alternative adsorbents for PFAS remediation processes. And we hope that the alternative adsorbents address some of the major deficiencies of conventional adsorbent materials. We are focusing on not only the widely studied anionic perfluoroalkyl acids, but also PFAS of varying charge state that are known to co-occur with perfluoroalkyl acids in contaminated groundwater. And to date, we have demonstrated morphological control, facile regeneration, and durability of our most promising polymer adsorbents. For those of you who are interested, I added a slide here to point towards some additional resources. These are papers that we have published over the past few years describing the development and evaluation of our cyclodextrin polymers, obviously in much more detail. And I would also like to point you towards our project website and offer my contact details if you would like to discuss any of this further. Meanwhile, thank you so much for your attention, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Damien. We have received a lot of questions, and we're going to start with one from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Do you agree that ion exchange resins tend to have a higher capital cost but lower life cycle cost when compared to GAC if the systems have the appropriate and sufficient treatment? And how does the cyclodextrin treatment cost compare to GAC and other ion exchange mechanisms?
Okay, well, thank you for the question from an organization within my own home state. I have to preface my answer by acknowledging that I'm not necessarily an expert in, say, life cycle assessment in the economics of adsorption processes. So the first part of the question was asking me to make some statements on the relative costs of a granular activated carbon treatment and an ion exchange treatment, presumably where the GAC might be less expensive of a material, but the ion exchange resins might have the life cycle benefit of regeneration potential. And so my understanding is that there are some emerging ion exchange resins that do exhibit facile regeneration, usually with some kind of salt-assisted solvent, and that I would presume that in some cases that would help lower the capital costs, and it would just depend on the starting costs, the base materials themselves, the GAC versus the ion exchange resins, to make that life cycle cost comparison. With respect to cyclodextrin adsorbents, I likewise can't really speak to specifics, but I can say that cyclodextrins themselves are commodity chemicals. So these are not expensive materials. I mentioned at the beginning that they're used in a variety of industrial and commercial products already, and they are produced at massive scales. Our synthesis pathway to generate cyclodextrin polymers is also simple. It's a one-step process. Even with some of the modifications that we've made to optimize yields and to impart the surface charges that we desire, this is a simple and facile process. So the capital costs for the cyclodextrin polymers are probably not as high as one might think. Coupling that with the regeneration potential that I mentioned at the end of my technical presentation, I do believe that these processes, or I hope that these processes, can be competitive over the course of a life cycle with both GAC and ion exchange resins. Thank you again for the question.
Thank you, Damien. The next question is from the U.S. Navy. How do these cyclodextrin polymers respond or perform when petroleum-based products are available, or in the media that you're treating? Are they at all effective in cleaning water that also has hydrocarbons in it?
That's an excellent question, and thank you for asking that from the U.S. Navy. So the question really links to the potential of cyclodextrin polymer adsorbents to be inhibited by co-contaminants, which is, of course, an issue for any adsorbent material. And I would say that we have conducted experiments in our lab, very controlled experiments, where there has been residual amounts of methanol in the experiments, and we know that methanol is a potential regeneration solution that disrupts the host-guest complex formation. And when there's trace amounts of methanol in our experiments, that has actually no effect on the measurements that we make with respect to affinity and binding and things like that. And so I would say that for co-contamination with hydrocarbons, I wouldn't necessarily expect the hydrocarbons to compete for adsorption sites, and I wouldn't necessarily expect the hydrocarbons to disrupt the host-guest complex formation between the interior cavity of the cyclodextrin and the PFAS. It would all depend on the relative amounts and the relative concentrations of the hydrocarbons, though, and I don't have specific data to speak to that question beyond that. Thank you so much again for the question.
Thanks, Damien. The next one is from the Army National Guard. You talked about regenerating the adsorbents. How many times can you regenerate them before you have to dispose of them? And how do you dispose of the adsorbents, and also the waste stream that you generate when you regenerate the adsorbents? So two questions there.
Yeah, all excellent questions. Thanks again for those questions. These are also common questions that anyone would face when they're dealing with an adsorbent that can be regenerated. And so the question was about what do we do with the regeneration solution and what do we do with the adsorbents upon regeneration? Oh, and also how many times can they be regenerated? So in our preliminary experiments, in the data that I showed, we've only carried out these regeneration cycle experiments out to 5 times, and we find that when we regenerate up to 5 times, there's no loss in performance, and we can quantitatively recover all of the material that had been absorbed by the adsorbent. So that's as much as we know. It's at least 5 times. We haven't repeated these experiments with the granules that I mentioned, and we haven't repeated these regeneration experiments after actually treating contaminated water. These have been controlled experiments in the lab. So you're right, once we regenerate these materials, we're going to be left with a solution, a solvent-based solution that has higher concentrations of PFAS, presumably, than were in the water in the first place. And so that's a hazardous waste that would have to be disposed of in a certain way. Incineration is an option. There are also a variety of PFAS destruction techniques that are being developed, many as part of SERDP funded projects, and that would also be an option, would be to pair the adsorption and regeneration with the destruction-based technology. If we can't regenerate and we need to dispose of the materials themselves, we haven't been looking into disposing of the materials, but incineration would again be an option. Some destructive technology or just packaging and landfilling, I suppose, would be the third option. So there are, I think, a variety of options that could be considered once these adsorbents come into actual use. Thanks again for the questions.
Thanks, Damien. All right, this is a question from the Sierra Club Toxics team. Do sediments in groundwater interact with the adsorbents when you're trying to treat PFAS contaminated groundwater? Does it impact the effectiveness of the technology that you described?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, and thanks for the question, it's about whether sediments or solid particles that would be present in any sort of, I guess, water system, how that might affect the performance. And I would say, from a chemical perspective and from a binding perspective, I haven't seen much of an effect of sediments being there. From the top of my head, I would suspect that sediments would have the biggest issue arising from sediments could potentially be in clogging a packed bed filtration type of system, and that's where our morphological control comes into play. So if we can generate perfect spheres or near perfect spheres of a certain diameter that has sufficient pore space to allow fine sediments to sort of just pass through, I think that would be the ideal solution to a sediment-laden system for remediation in a sediment-laden system. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. All right, this is a question from industry. Does your team envision a fixed bed adsorber configuration or another configuration such as a moving bed with filtration for recovering the PFAS and cyclodextrin complex?
Yeah, I can say both processes are viable. Both processes are under consideration in bench scale experiments in our academic labs, and I would say both processes are under consideration at the industrial scale with our industrial partner of CycloPure. So I think that I don't have a definitive answer over which one would be more ideal. It might be a case by case situation, but both are definitely viable and both are definitely under consideration. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Damien. And this question was asked at least 4 times. It refers to the chart that talked about the performance, and you mentioned GenX. And in that chart, you showed pretty consistent reduction in adsorption at both 8 hours versus 4 hours. So can you elaborate to what these results really mean?
So I believe that the questions, wow, it's amazing that at least 4 people picked up on that. I believe the question is referring to the bar graph where we looked at a mean CDP, removing these 22 anionic PFAS, and I had pointed out that equilibrium was reached somewhere between 30 minutes and 4 hours, and then there was also a bar representing 8 hours, and you might have seen that some of those bars at 8 hours were, you know, a bit lower. My recollection from those data was that that decrease was not statistically significant. So whereas we did see some change in that average, when we looked at the uncertainty in our measurements, also arising from replication of those experiments, that those were not necessarily significant decreases. So I don't think that we have a lot of evidence so far that there is a significant amount of desorption of PFAS from cyclodextrin polymers over time. I hope that that answers your question in a satisfactory way. Thanks for asking.
It does. Thank you, Damien. Yes, and we have over 40 questions that came in for you. I just want to end with one question from the Navy, and then we'll get back to you in the final Q&A session because it's time to move on to our next speaker. But very quickly, did you observe a binding efficiency difference between the branched and linear forms in ECF-derived PFAS?
That's an excellent question, and to give you a quick answer, we haven't explicitly looked into that. We don't have standards for the branched form, and when we have looked at AFFF contaminated groundwater, the branched version is always so much lower in terms of peak area when we're evaluating the efficiency that we often don't consider it because it's just such a small and minor constituent. It's often near the limit of detection anyway. So I don't have a good answer as to whether or not there's a differentiation between the linear and the branched at this time.
Thank you, Damien, for an excellent presentation and for your willingness to be bombarded by questions. But it is time to move on to our second speaker today, who's Dr. Satya Chauhan. Satya is a senior program director at the Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. He is currently leading efforts to develop and demonstrate PFAS-free fire suppressants for aerospace applications, as well as environmentally friendly de-icers and alternative fuels with low greenhouse gas emissions. Satya has over 200 publications and 76 patents, and he is the recipient of the 2020 Battelle Inventor of the Year Award. Satya has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur, an MBA from Ohio State University, and a doctorate in chemical engineering from Case Western Reserve University. Satya, we're delighted to have you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Rula. Thanks for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. It was a great talk by Damien, so hope I can maintain that standard of high quality talk here. I'm really pleased to talk about two ESTCP projects that are aimed at enhancing the performance of commercially available, or what we call mature PFAS-free foams, and we commonly refer to them as PFF. This is all relative to the DOD's or MIL-SPEC performance criteria. So here's an outline of what my talk is. We should understand that what we're trying to do is replace aqueous film forming foam, AFFF. These are products used to extinguish flammable liquid Class B fires, such as after aircraft crashes and so on. And the currently approved AFFF formulation, the so-called C6 AFFF, these contain what Damien talked about, are PFAS compounds that are of concern for environment and human health. And our challenge is that these AFFFs must be phased out of use by October 1, 2024. That's per the latest NDAA. And the problem then is none of the commercially available PFF products meet the mill spec. And the problem is quite challenging, but we got a tremendous government industry effort going on under the leadership of SERDP and ESTCP. So this is my outline. So before we can try to improve performance, we must understand how the products we're trying to test falls short of the requirements, in this case, the mill spec. So that's the assessment phase. And then once we understand where we need to focus for improving performance, then we need to optimize the technologies that we are proposing to improve the performance, and finally to demonstrate it at scale that's relevant, in this case for us, the Air Force. And I should say that my co-PI is Dr. Bridget Ashley from Tyndall Air Force Base, so we are performing the work mostly out there at Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City. So what kind of properties or characteristics of these new products are we trying to assess? Well, the mill spec has many requirements, but I'm showing a few key ones: the environmental toxicity, corrosivity, and the fire performance. And what we're trying to use by way of technologies are compressed air foam, which I'll talk about that, ultra high pressure, as well as functional additives to improve the performance. And we talked about the large scale fire testing that's needed. I'll come back to it, and eventually to find products that can serve the need and put it through technology transition so the DoD can start using in time. And realistically, these products need to be available by the end of FY 22 or end of September 23. I'm sorry, 23, that's right, yeah. So the government has 1 year to procure and start using the new products. So the way we started the project was a year ago. We reached out to potential suppliers of these PFFs in North America and Europe, and we received a dozen products that the vendors wanted to collaborate on and have us test them. And we are continuing to look for more products. We have the funding to test another half a dozen or so. And the results I'm going to show are for 7 products. You see them in this picture here, different colors. Some of them look quite viscous, as you can tell. They're almost gel-like. So what are the key requirements? Mentioned aquatic toxicity and biodegradability, physical properties such as surface tension, spreadability, and corrosion for various metals and alloys, and most importantly, the fire fighting performance measured in terms of time to put the fire out, and also the burn back time, which I'll describe later. And the mill spec speaks of fires of the size 28 square foot and 50 square foot. We typically have done 28 square foot fires that I'll talk a bit more about later. So what are the results so far? When you look at aquatic toxicity, we're looking at 2 values. The LC50 is that concentration at which the population of fish, 50% of the population dies. That's acute toxicity. And IC25, which is the concentration that results in 25% reduction in growth of the species, and that's the chronic toxicity. So we're measuring both. But what I show here is the LC50. And in here, AFFF is, this is the gray bar is for the C6 product, and it meets the mil spec, which requires a minimum of 500 milligrams per liter LC50, but none of the other products meet that requirement. They are typically an order of magnitude more toxic, as we would call, 5 to 10 times. But one thing to remember is that these products are diluted, typically 3 parts of the concentrate to 97 part water, and up to a maximum of 6 parts to 94 parts water. So in my view, the as delivered diluted product that is converted to foam really would meet this mil spec requirement. So, but until the mil spec changes, we cannot use that specification. So what about the biodegradability? We look at the biological demand during biodegradation of these products, BOD in 20 days, divided by the chemical oxygen demand, which is the total oxygen demand, and that ratio is biodegradability, and the requirement is for 65%. So as you can see, that except for one product, most others are close to 50% biodegradability. So not meeting the spec, but pretty close. Now, if you look at the mil spec, this is mil spec is a performance-based spec, but you find with a lot of old mil specs, other specs that this is several decades old, that some properties which really describe the physical properties of the products, and they really don't relate to the performance criteria. For example, the pH and refractive index really have little to no impact on fire performance, but these are there. So if you look at this chart here, I think the pH, most products meet the requirement, but some are marginally outside that window, and same thing for refractive index. So I would think that this not being really a performance spec, it needs to be reconsidered and these ranges brought in or not specified. There is a trend that we see in that these PFF products are getting very viscous. And the reason for this is that we're trying to replace AFFF, which is a primary mechanism of film forming over fire and seal the fire that way, as opposed to a high viscosity that gives you a more stable foam. And since the products we are looking at, by and large, do not have the film forming capability like the ones that we're trying to replace, that there's an attempt to increase the viscosity and thus improve the fire performance. So for example, the maximum viscosity at 5 degrees is shown here by the dashed line, but even at room temperature, 25 C, the viscosities are quite a bit higher. And what it might do is it might give some problems in handling this material, because we have to blend these with water, and high viscosity requires some equipment changes at the very least. We do know that once you dilute these products, the 3% or 6% solutions for making foam, those are much more manageable, so that's not a problem, but it's the handling of the concentrate. In the pollution prevention, which is what we're trying to do here, we are trying to replace a product which has got excellent performance here in this case, the fire fighting performance. And so we are trying to meet that requirement for firefighting performance, but we have to be careful that we don't solve one environmental problem, that is of PFAS elimination, with some other environmental problem, or as we have seen in many cases of pollution prevention research, the corrosion becomes an issue. Some of the replacement products might be more corrosive. So we looked at the corrosion performance for all these products. And the first column here shows the mil spec in milliinches per year. And anything in the red means that these values are higher. By and large, you see that many products do meet the mil spec for corrosion performance, but some do not, and therefore they may have to utilize some corrosion inhibitors. So that's the corrosion performance. Now, to give you some idea as to how a typical fire test is performed, so we're using 28 square foot pans, which where we have a level of water first and then pour gasoline. So we've got 10 gallons of gasoline. We let it burn for 10 seconds before we start applying foam. And the mil spec requirement is 30 seconds maximum. But as I'll show later, it is taking quite a bit longer with some products to put the fire out. But anyway, when the fire is extinguished, the foam is dispensed for an additional 60 seconds. And then we insert what we call a burn back pan, where a fire is lit in a small pan, and we watch the spreading of that fire. And after a certain point, we say, hey, that burn back time, we want that time to be at least 360 seconds. And so we're measuring the extinguishment time, we're measuring the burn back time. So we confirmed in this project very early that none of the products we tested meet the mil spec for fire extinguishment time. And we also found that while most meet the spec for burn back time, a few don't meet that spec either. So how do we improve the performance of these products? And our approach is to look at engineering solutions. This is what we will classify as a way of delivering the foam using a compressed air foam or ultra high pressure. But we also can look at some unique functional additives to these commercially available foam products to improve the performance. So that's what I'll talk about next. So how do we, how's the foam made? So a typical mil spec nozzle is an air aspirating nozzle where the liquid, which is the 3% or 6% concentrate, fed in here, and the air is introduced through venturi, and that creates the foam. And then most of the foam develops after leaving the nozzle. So that's how the mil spec nozzle works. So let's see how the compressed air foam nozzle works. In this case, we are using compressed air at 100 to 200 psi. That's injected in a line. Most of the foam develops before release from the nozzle. And this is sort of like what happens with shaving cream, where you have similar kind of mechanism that you get a very, very stable foam. In fact, sometimes you can see even next day some foam is sticking to the outlet of the shaving cream dispenser. So that's the idea here. We get a much better quality foam, and we have found that the quality of the foam does improve the firefighting performance. So let's look at another technique, ultra high pressure. This is where we're using pressure, a little over 1,000 psi, and using an aspirating nozzle. And we look to reduce the extinguishment time. We have just started testing it, so I don't have results today. But this technique can be used in combination with dry chemicals like potassium bicarbonate. And why that combination? Well, here's the idea of how we put fires out. We got a chain reaction where the fire is developing and the mechanisms we are using are depriving the fire of oxygen, cooling the fire, and take the fuel away. And of course, we can't take the fuel away. We're really looking at preventing the transfer of oxygen to the fire, cooling the fire, and disrupting the fire. And with this combination, we can do all three. So that we have to utilize all the mechanisms available to us for fighting fires. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was that as you improve the foam quality, and foaming means you're expanding the mix of the diluted liquid product, and then you're introducing air. And the expansion ratio, the mil-spec actually has a requirement, I didn't put it here, a minimum of 5 expansion ratio. And also the time it takes for the foam to collapse, and you get 25% of it turning into liquid draining. And that has got a minimum of 360 seconds. So what you find here is that these specs are met with mil-spec criteria, but clearly these products do not meet the mil-spec. So it has got to be more than just meeting this particular spec. Now let's see the same thing with compressed air foam. We can easily double the foam expansion, but we found that more is not necessarily better, that there is an optimum expansion ratio. In this case, we're using 10, which is what we found with C6 foams. And so you can see that we are able to achieve that expansion ratio in all cases. And of course, the drain time is no problem. A couple of these products do claim to be film forming, so they're not as dependent on the foam quality. So why is this important? Well, depending on the chemistry of the fluid or the product, you would need different mechanisms to improve its performance. So if something's already film forming, you don't need to have another additive or something to improve that property. But if some product is lacking in foam quality, we could improve that compressed air foam and so on. So let's look at some of the results that we have to date. So we're showing the blue bars are the results time to put a fire out, and the black line here shows 30 seconds as a mil-spec. So you can see products going up to 200 seconds, the blue bars. And when we use compressed air foam, in all cases, there's some reduction in the time to put the fire out. Clearly, the ones which are not the best performers, they are seeing more effect, which is fine, which means that products that you would have otherwise not considered can now be considered the compressed air foam. And in an average improvement of 47%, that's a reduction in time to put a fire out. So pretty encouraging results so far. One interesting thing is that you achieve 90% control very quickly. So Blue bar here, 90% control. It takes a lot longer to reach 100% fire extinguishment. Well, there's not a mil-spec for 90% fire control, but this does give us an idea as to which product based on 90% control might be okay to study using CAF, because otherwise somebody looks at the full extinguishment time, and if that is over 300 seconds or something, they may not want to continue with that. So this is useful in our research. Now, what about the burn back time? I mentioned earlier that most products, the blue lines, already meet this requirement. Well, there are a couple of products so far that do not. And in all cases, we are also improving the burn back time, and especially in this one product, what was not previously meeting a mil-spec now does meet. So with some products, it would be useful to have CAF improve that burn back time spec as well. So how does a user decide on which products to use? Because we got 12 products we have received so far. We're looking for another half a dozen, and they will have different performances and different properties. So we look at the criteria. It would be fire performance, equipment compatibility and ease of use, environmental impact. So there are two minimum criteria: the extinguishment time and burn back time. You have to meet the mil-spec. The products have to be free of PFAS, and beyond that, the other consideration, the type of equipment you have, the ability to use products, and the cost and availability of the products would be criteria that the user would have to consider. We are expecting that these projects will be successful. We are already successful in showing that the critical deficiency of many products, fire extinguishment time, we're able to significantly reduce that, which means improving the performance. And we are hopeful, quite hopeful, that with additional optimization and testing we have planned, that we can meet the DoD objective of having these products available so they can be used starting October 2024, if not sooner. The primary reason why we are replacing these products that is the AFFF is because we're allowed to continue to use them until these alternative products are available, but the cleanup costs are high. We also find that some products are less costly. On the other hand, both CAF and UHP will have some capital cost that would be added to existing equipment. So we're in the midst of doing a payback analysis, looking at the cost and benefits. So overall, the primary benefit is to be able to replace PFAS in firefighting foams, and we are quite optimistic about meeting that goal. We do have a little over one more year to go, and the way we have structured this project is we'll test the products as they come in. So we have tested 7 products. We'll continue that testing. At the same time, we are soliciting new products because vendors are now learning about new chemistries based on the performance so far and based on the discussion that our workshops organized by SERDP and ESTCP have had. So we're going to see new products. So we're going to expand our list of products to test. And it is quite possible that compressed air foam or ultra high pressure alone would not be able to meet the current spec for firefighting. And that's why we have a new focus on coming up with functional additives. So we take what's good in an existing product and add some magical single commercially available additive that the user can use and further close the gap between the performance and the null spec. And at Air Force, we will be doing 100 square foot diameter fire testing, and that is planned for this fall, and that will continue through next calendar year. Well, in conclusion, we're quite pleased with the progress so far. While none of the products meet the null spec, we have seen that aquatic and acute toxicity was an order of magnitude higher, but the delivered foam toxicity may be okay. The viscosity is a concern, and we're beginning to see some lower viscosity products come out. A few products have corrosivity concerns, but some corrosion inhibitors could take care of that. Other physical properties seem acceptable, but one other requirement that we have is that different products that are certified be compatible with each other. So when you switch from one product to another, you don't have to throw away the old ones. That is an unknown. We do know that compressed air foam does improve fire performance quite significantly, both in terms of extinguishment time and the burn back time, but we still need additional improvement. And so we're going to optimize these two techniques. We're going to additionally look at some additives to meet the spec as it exists now. So just one reference here for aquatic toxicity. I do want to thank my colleagues from Battelle and Tyndall Air Force Base Fire Research Team for performing this work. And I'll be pleased to answer any questions. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Satya. We've received 26 questions so far, and we're going to get right to the elephant in the room. This is a question from the California State Water Resources Control Board, and they'd like to know whether, based on your work, if you have a recommendation for less harmful Class B firefighting foam, which is effective.
Well, these are Class B firefighting foams we're looking at for aircraft rescue fire applications, and the products claim to be all PFAS-free, although SERDP has a program where they'll be confirming the PFAS content and the fluorine content. So we certainly expect many products to meet that requirement.
Great, thank you. And this is a question from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. When will your results be publicly available? And will you include in your report the names of the products that you tested?
Very good question. So far, we've been giving code names to products because we have not had a chance to discuss the results with the vendors. I think at this point, it is important to note that there are some products that are close to meeting the requirement, but eventually, with permission from the vendors and SERDP ESTCP, we would be publishing those results. So it's a sensitive question, but certainly our results will be available to ESTCP with the product names, and we'll leave it to them on how to release the name of products. Clearly, users would know which products are which, but we would like to have vendors involved in that loop and giving approval to Battelle or ESTCP for releasing the name. but I think this could happen next year.
Right. So you expect to have a final report available within a year or slightly longer? Because we got that question several times also.
Yeah, so our final report will be available in FY22, but that doesn't mean that the results can be published much sooner. So we're continuing to present our results to ESTCP groups, and so publication of results, including this presentation today, should be available over the next 12 months. Probably every 3 to 6 months, there would be publication of results. So final report doesn't have to be necessarily be there for it to be useful for users.
Thank you, Satya. And this is a question from the Port of Seattle Fire Department. Is the FAA involved with this testing? And is there an expectation? Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, great. Great question. So we do have a, for our regulatory advisory group, we have FAA, we have EPA, and of course NAVC, which owns the MIL-SPEC. They're all involved in reviewing our results, so FAA is very much involved.
Wonderful, and you just answered the second part of the question and saved me the trouble of asking it. All right, this next one is from Prince George Airport in Canada. Have you done any testing in very cold temperatures? And does that impact at all the performance of some of these foams? We're talking about temperatures as low as negative 40 degrees C in the winter in that part of Canada.
So one of the projects that we just started 3 months ago has the specific objective of looking at the effect of ambient temperature on fire performance. And I think there the thinking was that when ambient temperature is high, such as hot time weather periods in Florida, that might present some changes in fire performance. But the testing at the other extreme of very cold regions, you know, some of the issues are not just fire testing, which is unknown, but also the handling of products, which are already quite viscous. So that is, we will take another look at the lower temperature end of it, and if we may work with you to understand what specific concerns you have and what sites you might have for testing. But we'll have to, we are now in a controlled environment for testing, and so we can, within reason, control the temperature in the hangar where we do this testing.
Great, thank you. This next question is from the city of Chattanooga, and it's a two-part question. Do most of the PFAS-free foams work with existing equipment for AFFF, and then some of the engineering approaches that you described, are they compatible with existing equipment, or are we discussing complete equipment rehaul here?
Very good question. So the MIL-SPEC results I presented, that equipment obviously is available. Many DoD installations have compressed air foam fitted trucks. We are also looking at some easy retrofitting of existing MIL-SPEC nozzle type of equipment with compressed air foam. So that is on our list to do, and we have discussions going on that, and we'll be talking more about it next year as well.
Thank you, Satya. At this point, I'd love to pull Damien back into the discussion. There were several questions that were asked that we didn't get to. So Damien, this one is for you. Are the cyclodextrin polymers that you discussed available for pilot testing or other types of evaluations at DoD facilities?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So as part of our SERDP project so far, we have not done any pilot testing at any DoD facilities. But CycloPure, which is again the startup company that's commercializing these materials, they have done some pilot testing at municipalities around the country, and also in collaboration with some DoD contractors or facilities. And so if anyone is interested in doing some evaluations or some pilot scale testing, I would say the best chance is to either contact me, and I can put you in contact with the folks at CycloPure, or to just Google CycloPure and contact them directly. And I think that they are very willing to engage with collaborations and work with people to continue to evaluate their materials at pilot scale.
Thank you, Damian. And Satya, you talked about a cost-benefit analysis once you complete this work. This question is from the city of Chattanooga. How will you make the results of this cost-benefit analysis available?
So the same way that we will make that available relative to fire performance, that we would have such results presented at these annual SERDP ESTCP meetings and in workshops, and we can also directly engage with users. But our idea is from this project, the technology transfer plan we have is to prepare a guidance manual where we show how to use CAF, what's involved in retrofitting for CAF, what's the cost, and so is part of that guidance manual, which will be available to everybody. You will have that as well.
Wonderful. And as we wrap up, Damian, you know, the topic for today's webinar and the webinar that's in 2 weeks is sort of twofold: managing AFFF historical impacts to subsurface environments, and then the next generation of PFAS-free foams. Do you have any last messages you would like to leave our audience with today as it relates to your work? Any take-home messages that you want to hammer in?
I would just like to say that we're developing this family of adsorbents. We believe that adsorption technologies are very promising from a cost perspective when it comes to PFAS remediation, and we're hoping to contribute something to to possible solutions for PFAS contaminated groundwater. I think maybe some of the destruction technologies that you'll hear about in future webinars are also quite interesting and quite viable, and maybe there are also opportunities to combine adsorption-based technologies with destruction technologies, particularly when you're concerned about regeneration solutions and things like that. So I really appreciate everyone for attending, and thanks a lot again for the questions and for listening.
Thank you, Damian. Satya, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yes, so thanks again for listening, but I do think that the problem we are trying to solve is a challenging one, and I'm very encouraged by the government-industry partnership, and I'm especially pleased with the cooperation we have received from vendors. Vendors have been honest with telling us what their needs are, where the shortcomings are, and I think with the collective minds of the vendors and performers, the Battelle and DoD, we will find a way of improving products, improvements that would be applicable to competitors and collaborators alike.
Thank you so much, Satya. That's such an important point. It's this collaboration between industry and academia and the regulators that are going to push the state of knowledge as it relates to AFFF management and assessment of alternative foams. So thank you, and thank you to Damian for this amazing webinar. And before we conclude, I would like to remind you that our next webinar is in 2 weeks, Thursday, October 22nd. It'll be the second part of the AFFF series that we started today. We will feature 2 speakers, on October 22nd, Dr. Jinyoung Liu from the University of California, Riverside, and he'll discuss his research on PFAS defluorination and reaction mechanisms for PFAS degradation using hydrated electrons generated under UV irradiation. And our second speaker will be Mr. Jerry Back from Jensen Hughes, and Jerry will talk about his work on assessing the effectiveness of AFFF alternatives, including PFAS-free foams, as well as wetting agents and other alternatives. Registration is open, so please visit the SERDP and ESTCP webinar webpage to register for this and for other future webinars all the way through the end of 2021. And before we conclude, I'd like to remind you that both the audio and a copy of the presentation of today's session will be archived on our webinar webpage in case you'd like to refer to them in the future. We would appreciate it at this time if you can please take a moment to complete a very quick survey that will pop up on your screen. This concludes today's webcast. Thank you so much for your attention.